G'day, I'm Cahn. A couple of weeks ago, I put a video out talking about using induction cooktops and inverters in 12-volt setups. And I had a bunch of people comment saying, just use gas. So today, I'm gonna put that to the test. And it's not just gonna be theory, I'm actually gonna compare different gas setups to cooking electrically to see what's faster, what's more efficient, and overall, what's cheaper, not just up front, but in the long run. Basically, when does it become more economical to choose gas over electricity or vice versa? Now, before we get into the test, I want to talk about the numbers because this is where a lot of arguments start. If you take a 120 amp hour lithium battery, it can store around 1500 watt hours of energy. That's found by multiplying the capacity, 120 amp hours, by the nominal voltage, which is about 12.8 volts for a lithium iron phosphate battery. Overall, 1500 watt hours, or about 3000 watt hours for the two batteries. Now, on the other hand, if you picked up one of these little 220 to 230 gram butane canisters, they can store about 10.6 megajoules of energy. To find kilowatt hours, we divide by 3.6. So these little canisters individually can each hold about 3 kilowatt hours of energy. So roughly the same amount of energy is in this or this as you'd be able to get out of two 120 amp hour batteries. But that's not the whole story because we need to think about energy efficiency. Even if you use something like a jet boil that's been specially designed with heaps of surface area and a really close flame distance, the maximum efficiency you can get for cooking is around 50%. On a typical gas stove, you're looking at around 32%. And I found that by Googling and found a bunch of government websites and consumer reports and independent studies. So 32% is what I'm gonna go with. I'm not gonna argue with it, but we'll see if the numbers check out in the end. On the other hand, induction is much more efficient. It's around 85 to 90% efficient on its own because none of the heat is wasted into the air or going around the pan. It's all directly in contact. But in my setup, I'm also running it through an inverter and then into the 12-volt battery. So there's gonna be losses inherent in the system as well. And I figured it's probably gonna be around 80% efficient overall. So here's the setup I'm working with. I borrowed two identical saucepans from the kitchen and I'm gonna boil the same amount of water for the same length of time. Now to make everything fair, I'm just gonna do 2 liters of water, bring it to the boil and then boil it for a further 10 minutes. And I know people are gonna say, oh, but I only cook my pasta for 5 minutes, or if you're doing a stir fry, it might only be 5 minutes. But I needed to put a line in the sand and actually pick a certain point. I'm gonna do that so everything is a constant. I don't wanna be adjusting gas because I might adjust one setup slightly different to the other, and I don't wanna turn the power down on the induction cooktop. I have 3 different gas options, so I've got a lot of data points. Starting with these 220 gram butane canisters in this sort of stove, I've also got 230 gram isobutane canisters that would go on your typical backpacking or hiking stove. And then I've got 468 gram or 1 pound propane bottles that'll go in a bit bigger stove. This is basically the same setup as if you were using a 4 kilo or 9 kilo gas bottle, but it's a lot easier to work with because I'm gonna weigh this before and after each cook to see how many grams of gas I use, and then I can figure out how much you'd get out of a bigger bottle as well. Then on the electric side, I've got two 120 amp hour lithium batteries, a 2000 watt inverter and a 2000 watt induction cooktop. And I'm gonna run that through a shunt to measure what's coming out of the batteries and an AC watt meter so I can see what's actually coming out of the inverter. I'm also gonna mark every can as A or B. That way I can actually make sure I'm using the same can every time. And if one doesn't work, I have a backup. I've already done a couple of tests at home to make sure that this setup works, and I used can A, and I've got my before and after measurements for those tests. So now I'm gonna use can B and see what I end up with. First up, I'm gonna test the butane canisters versus the induction setup. So, it took about 6 minutes to start a rolling boil with the induction cooktop, and then I cooked it for a further 10 minutes, and it used around 560 watt hours. I'll do the maths again when I'm back in front of the computer and update that if it's wrong. As for this little butane gas stove, it took 12.5 minutes to get to a rolling boil, so it's still got about another 5 minutes to go yet. So there's about 2 minutes to go on this gas stove now, and then I will take out that butane canister and reweigh it and see how many grams of gas we've used for this one cook. All right, we'll turn it off there. Okay, so preliminary results. The induction used about 560 watt hours of energy. That's including the inefficiencies through the system because that was measured at the shunt. This gas stove used about 840 watt hours of energy. So I'm going to reset the table with my bigger stove and my hiking stove. We'll do it all again. That's about 10 minutes. Carefully turn that off. Now earlier when I weighed this with the stove on top, it was about 599 grams. I'm just wiping it off to get all the condensation off, because a fair bit builds up. Might add a couple of grams. Weighing it again, we get 525. So it's used about 74, 75 grams of gas for one meal. All right, that's it. All the way off. I'll unscrew this gas bottle. Get the condensation off a little bit. Now this one weighed 922 grams before this test. Afterwards, it's 840 grams. So that's about 80 grams or so. So after all, I did end up doing a specific test just bringing the water to a boil and a 10-minute simmer test, as well as the tests measuring to the boil, then boiling for a further 10 minutes. This will hopefully give me a fairer average and better match real-world cooking. For the 10-minute simmer, I tried to set the gas as low as possible just before it cut out. The induction cooktop I set to its lowest at 300 watts, and that basically meant it alternated between being on at 1300 watts for 25% of the time, then off for 75% of the time, which averages to about 300 watts, I suppose. First, let's talk about speed to actually get the water boiling. First place goes to induction with an average of right around 6 minutes. Next was the hiking stove at just over 6 minutes 30. Following that was the propane single burner at 10:30. Finally, the butane stove, which took 12 minutes 30 to reach the rolling boil. Now, while we're here, let's add how much power it took to reach the boil. Induction wins again with just under 240 watt hours, followed by the butane stove in second at 449 watt hours, and the hiking stove in third with 452. They actually used the same 33 grams of gas to boil, but isobutane has slightly more energy per gram, so it lost out. Honestly, that could be called a tie. Fourth place was then the propane burner at 650 watt hours. And I double checked this to make sure it's right. Propane does have more energy per gram, which affected the result, but it also just used more gas. Next, how much energy each setup used to simmer water for 10 minutes. Induction wins again at 145 watt hours, then it was isobutane, butane, finally propane. As for a total boil and simmer, here are the results. Induction used significantly less yet again. On that note, here's how much gas each setup used as an average over my 3 full noise, full power boiling tests. For induction, 567 watt hours, which wins again on efficiency, even when it was at full power the whole time. Then it was the butane with 811, isobutane with 986, and propane with 1,116 watt hours. I also averaged the energy used between boiling, then simmering, and then boiling and boiling for 10 minutes, and you get the next column of numbers here. And I've also added how much gas on average was used. That way I can calculate how many meals you'd get out of any canister. This is where I can bring in larger gas bottles. A 3.7 kilo refill will give you about 53 meals, and an 8.5 kilo will get you around 121. So looking at all the numbers, induction is by far the fastest and most efficient way to cook. But next, let's take a look at the costs. Feel free to shop around, but this is what I found for prices up front. Butane stove, $25, plus a 4-pack of canisters for $6, that's $31. Next up, isobutane. They start around $30, then $5 per canister for $35 total. Then we get onto the portable propane or LPG setup. It cost me about $70 for the stove and then $12 for the 468 gram gas bottle, so $82. If you scale that up to a 3.7 or 8.5 kilo gas bottle, you'd be looking at $135 and $150 up front for the stove, bottle and gas. However, you'd be able to get about 53 or 121 meals out of them. For induction, I'll compare to 4 different setups. First, you already have your 12-volt setup and you just need to buy the induction cooktop. That's around $50. Next, you already have batteries but need the inverter, wiring and cooktop. That's about $250. Third, if you're already planning for a 12-volt setup to run a fridge and lighting, but now you'll need more battery capacity, bigger DC-DC and solar, so you need to budget for a further $600. And finally, assuming you want the whole lot just for cooking up front, that's about $1,200. So up front or for occasional use, a cheap gas stove is by far the most cost-effective option. After your initial investment in each setup, there's the ongoing gas purchase or refill costs, and you'll get a stable per meal cost, forgetting about inflation and assuming that gas prices don't go up. Butane is 38 cents per meal, isobutane is about $1.25, but I know you can get bigger bottles that'll bring that cost down. Then you have the 468 gram propanes at $1.79 per meal, and then the 3.7 kilo or 8.5 kilo gas refills will cost you 43 cents and 26 cents per meal respectively. For induction, at 475 watt hours average, I calculated you could probably get about 6 meals per battery cycle from my 240 amp hour battery bank. Assume 2,000 cycles and you've got 12,000 meals. That equates to roughly half a cent, 2 cents, 5 cents, or 10 cents per meal long term, assuming you cook all 12,000 meals. So induction is by far the cheapest long term if you cook enough. But the question is, at what point does electric cooking become the cheapest option? If all you need is the induction cooktop for $50, you may as well go that option. It's cheaper up front than bigger gas bottles and it'll only take between 12 and 50 meals to beat the smaller setups. If you're investing $250, it's still a good medium-term option, ranging between 94 and 584 meals before it's beaten the gas and no longer costs you anything. That's about 10 months if you're cooking twice daily. If you're planning a setup anyway, but you'll need to upsize it to be able to cook with an inverter, so it'll cost $600, it'll take between 289 and 1,729 meals. That's about 2.5 years of cooking 2 meals a day. And unless you're really against having any gas or you can't have it in your vehicle or off-grid setup, it's a really hard ask to justify a fully electric cooking setup, unless you're already planning to have one anyway. Costing at least $1,200 for enough capacity and recharging ability to reliably cook once or twice every day will still take from 625 to over 4,000 meals to outperform gas depending on the setup. That's up to 5.5 years cooking 2 meals a day. So if you're planning a long-term off-grid setup to live in or travel in full time, then in my opinion, it could be worth investing in a fully electric setup from the get-go. There's no gas refills, you can use it in a total fireban and it's a lot quicker and easier. But if you're a casual camper and just starting out, maybe it's worth thinking about a cheap gas stove. A combination or hybrid approach is probably best if you're a four-wheel drive tourer or overlanding style camper. And in that case, you might even be able to get away with a smaller battery setup if you're only occasionally going to use induction, something like a single 120 or 200 amp hour lithium battery. But in those cases, you probably already have a fairly comprehensive 12-volt setup, so it's not going to be a whole lot more to add what you need to run induction. Now for me, I'm not going to throw away my little gas stove anytime soon, but it has given me a lot to think about. And while I'm planning the canopy for my Land Cruiser build, I'm definitely going to make sure it's able to run induction because it's just so quick and easy. So for everyone who said just use gas, good call. And to the bloke who said that I wouldn't be able to use a 2,000 watt induction cooktop on a 2,000 watt inverter because it would catch on fire, so far so good. Finally, big shout out to my channel members. Thank you all so much. If anyone else does want to join up and help contribute to me buying my next $5 gas canister, it'd be much appreciated, but it's completely optional. I'm going to keep making these hopefully helpful videos regardless, and I'll see you in the next one.